Good afternoon, everyone. It's Pablo Zuanic, equity analyst for the cannabis sector here at Zuanic and Associates. I have the pleasure of introducing three speakers to you on our discussion today regarding the outlook for adult legalization of cannabis use in Pennsylvania. We have Scott Paterno. He's a principal at JPJ Consulting. We have Trent Woloveck, Chief Strategy Director at Jushi Holdings. And we have John Sullivan, EVP Public Affairs at Cresco Labs. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you
for having us, Pablo.
So we'll start with introductions. So Scott, I'll start with you. If you can just briefly tell us about what you do and your involvement in the cannabis industry. Thanks.
Sure. I'm a contract lobbyist in Pennsylvania. I've been representing different industries in Pennsylvania now for about 20 years. I have been working in the cannabis industry now for about 5. I've had the pleasure of working with Jushi for 4 of those years. And mainly with, my role in the cannabis industry right now is trying to make adult use real in Pennsylvania.
Good, thank you. Trent, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Trent Woloveck. I'm the Chief Strategy Director at Jushi Holdings, owner-operator, obviously, in Pennsylvania, and 6 other markets across the country. Myself, I've been involved in the cannabis space since 2009 out here in Colorado, and have evolved and grown multiple businesses, helped folks win licenses as new markets have come on board, and then recently ran a large vertical company here in Colorado until joining Jushi at its founding in early 2018.
Thank you. John, go ahead.
Yes, hi, John Sullivan. I'm the Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at Cresco Labs. I've worked in and out of government since for about 35 years now in different capacities, but got into the cannabis industry 10 years ago now as an owner and operator of 2 dispensaries in Illinois when it first launched its medical program. Then became Executive Vice President at Cresco Labs in 2018, and since then I've been working on cannabis issues in government throughout the country.
Thank you. So, look, I mean, obviously the focus here is going to be on adult legalization, but Trent, I'll start with you first. Give us a brief overview of where we are with the medical cannabis market in Pennsylvania right now, evolution over time, economics, impact from other states legalizing, and, brief contrast with other medical markets. Thank you.
Sure. So, Pennsylvania, I think, has a lot of exposure for many of the large MSOs and many of the cannabis operators across the country. And so, a large state with 13 plus million people, you saw a medical market really take shape and take form starting about 5-6 years ago. We've seen explosive patient growth. We currently have about 450-ish thousand active patients. And so, a little over 4% patient adoption is a great medical market. You're talking top of the adoption rate for most states. Typically, if you're at that 2% adoption rate of total population, you're in a great spot. And so, we've seen continued growth from that perspective. I think what we've seen most recently is a lot of pricing pressure. A lot of the operators built capacity with the expectation of adult use. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet. We're working towards that feverishly. We'll get into that later in the conversation. But, you've seen pricing actually come down so that we have more patients coming into the marketplace, which has been really exciting to see. We've now seen kind of it leveling off from a pricing perspective. And so a reduction in some supply as well has really allowed the market to stabilize and continue to see good, solid growth. Obviously, with the implementation of adult use in New Jersey, I think that's been the big one, over the last 12-18 months. Unfortunately, a lot of the patients aren't renewing their cards that are on the eastern border of Pennsylvania and jumping over because it's just that much easier into New Jersey. Very similar to when gaming first started, people were going from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. And now most recently with Maryland coming online, I think you're just seeing additional pressure, come from that perspective. Hopefully New York gets their act together, and that would be a little pressure to the north. And then obviously tomorrow is a big day in Ohio from an adult use perspective. So, you know, kind of all sides to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have an adult use market. So I think you're just going to continue to see, you know, pressure from a patient perspective leaving the state and going elsewhere.
So Trent, just staying with you in terms of the medical market, any recent changes, whether in terms of formats or anything that the regulator has done to help the medical market, and talk about, you know, whether there's friction or whether they are united, you know, what I would call the MSOs and the independent growers in Pennsylvania. How is that working out?
Yeah, I think, you know, most recently, we've started to have troches, which is an infused product, come into the marketplace. I think we've seen, you know, large patient adoption from that perspective, from that product. And so, you know, we've seen some new products coming into the marketplace there, which is, you know, allowed that continued kind of steady state growth, along with that pricing compression that I talked about to compete with the illicit market and then other adult use states. You know, that I think is important. It's not the cure-all by any means. Adult use is, you know, the real winner here. But, you know, as far as medical steady state goes, any and all new products that come online obviously help there. You know, and then as far as the industry goes from a medical perspective, we all know that there's a Senate bill that got up and out of the Senate, is now currently being read on the floor in the House around the independent grower processors, meaning non-vertical folks, as well as the independent retailers, where they would be allowed to be vertically integrated. And so I think, you know, with that, you know, coming to fruition, hopefully over the next, you know, couple days or weeks, will allow everybody from an industry perspective to sing from the same hymn sheet and push adult use forward, and hopefully, you know, get that stood up, implemented and executed, because quite frankly, that's the only way, you know, all of our businesses survive and thrive moving forward.
Understood. Thank you for that. Scott, you know, I'll start with you now then. So with all this pressure from the neighboring states, you would think it would be a no-brainer for the legislature and the governor to get adult legalization done in Pennsylvania, right? So talk about what are the impediments? Why hasn't Pennsylvania adopted reg yet?
Well, the reason we haven't adopted yet is the simple politics right now. The Republicans controlled it. Last session, they controlled the House and the Senate, not the governorship. They now control the Senate, not the House. And they were not ready to move politically on it last time through. There wasn't enough buy-in. But what you're seeing now, and what I think the word we keep hearing in conversations, even with Republicans, is the word inevitable. And, you know, adult use is inevitable, whether it's coming from a federal change or whether it comes from a Pennsylvania change. And part of the discussion that's happening now is what are the advantages of Pennsylvania moving more quickly as opposed to waiting for another federal cram down or, you know, a change federally. And what we're seeing, though, I think in terms of impediments, is that you have a handful of legislators that are very much committed at the moment to taking a hardline position that's, I want to say, you know, I hate to use the term morally based, but I think that's what they're viewing it as. Whereas you have a much larger section, both between the Democratic caucus and a smaller fraction of the Republican caucus, that are viewing it much more pragmatically. And you're seeing that, you know, what Trent just outlined in terms of the adult use markets around Pennsylvania. Within a year or so, you'll have about 90% of the population of Pennsylvania within a 45-minute hour drive away from legal cannabis. And, you know, we saw what happened with the amount of money that left Atlantic City when Pennsylvania switched and adopted gaming in Pennsylvania. Atlantic City really took a hit because there was so much money leaving PA going down there that then stayed clear nearby. You'll see that same type of thing happen in Pennsylvania with cannabis. And that's part of the pressure that's building on the legislature.
Thank you. John, the same question for you. I mean, in terms of impediments and why it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I think Scott made a lot of good points there. I'll say that I think the major difference for me and for I think the industry writ large in Pennsylvania right now is the governor's leadership. Even go back to the medical program when Trent talked about the introduction of troches into the marketplace. and also, dispensaries getting approved quicker, et cetera. We have a governor, I think, and Governor Shapiro now, who's really invested in this industry. Another important point I think that often gets overlooked is the governor has put revenue from adult use cannabis into his 2025 budget. So the governor is starting to show real leadership in this issue. And I think as he shows more leadership, it's going to encourage more people to get involved and probably a deal to be brokered in the Pennsylvania legislature. As Scott alluded to, it's a little tough right now. I mean, the House of Representatives is led by, I think, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, one vote on the Democrat side right now. Clearly the Senate is still held by Republicans, but we've seen real bipartisanship already. Senator Street and Laughlin, Republican and Democrat, put together, I think, a nice framework for conversation for the industry. I think that it was a good start, but as we see bipartisan work more, and also this realization that the Pennsylvania budget is going to need cannabis revenue, and right now they're losing millions, tens of millions of dollars to surrounding states, and with Ohio coming, that probably only gets worse for Pennsylvania. So it's going to become an acute need, I think, for their budgetary process, which will lead to some more level heads, I think, on both sides of the aisle about what Pennsylvania needs to get done with adult use.
Yeah, John, just to verify, go on, Scott. Sorry, go on.
No, so one thing to add about Shapiro, and this is kind of unique given the environment we live in. He's polling in the 60s in terms of approval rating, which in this day and age might as well be a 90. And so, the amount of leverage that he would have coming to the table when the time comes is different than we saw with a Wolf, who was his predecessor, who paid lip service to the industry, but really never put his shoulder into it. And I think that John's correct. It's in the budget, and there is a much bigger appetite from this administration to do big things. And then this would certainly rank as one of those big things.
Thank you. John, just to clarify for the audience, are there taxes on medical cannabis in Pennsylvania? And remind us, how much revenue did the governor put in the 25 budget from cannabis?
I'm not sure the exact revenue number that he has in the 25 budget, Scott. I don't know if you have that off the top.
The first year was about $20 million. It was a lowball number at a 20% rate.
Okay. And medical doesn't have taxes in Pennsylvania, right, Trent? Okay, anyway.
Yeah, currently no.
Yeah. So Scott, I mean, we want to obviously dive into that, but in terms of, the hot buttons, if you want, or what matters to Republicans here to get this done, what matters to Democrats, is about social equity, is it about just revenue? What are the factors? And more nuance in terms of the Senate is 28 Republicans, 22 Democrats. All you need is a few to flip and we get that done, right? But maybe expand on that in terms of what matters to the Republicans. And is it as simple as flipping, 3 or 4 people?
Well, right now, I think you've got if there was a blind vote held in the Senate, it would pass. I mean, right now you've got 2 Republicans who are openly supporting adult use legalization, Senator Regan, Senator Laughlin. There's a number of other ones that are not going to do so publicly yet until there's a bill moving, I believe. But it's one of those things where once it gets momentum, that you'll see people get on the bus. The big difference, I think, in terms of the perspective is the Republicans look at this as an opportunity. One of the things that Governor Shapiro has talked about doing is getting a dedicated revenue stream for the state police and stop taking it from highway money. Well, obviously, there's some people that believe that there's a natural fit there with revenue coming from cannabis. Now, obviously, on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats would like to see more of that money applied to social equity causes and putting money through some of the social equity programs that they'd like to see in place. And that's sort of that's the friction. That's really what do we do with the money? And it'll have to be a negotiated settlement somewhere coming between those two positions, where there will be some money for law enforcement and treatment and revenue for those types of programs, while at the same time some of that revenue will be directed toward whether it be an equity bank to help social equity licensees get on their feet, helping with the cost of expungements, what have you. There will be some form of social equity that has to be part of it. And that's really where the two sides, where the House and the Senate become sort of a proving ground for the industry, because while we have a Senate bill that a lot of us like and that has a good framework in it, it would have trouble in the House without some changes to it, and of course adding some social equity components. That will need to happen, and seeing where the House will go in that direction has been a challenge.
And I will say to that point, the nice thing about the Street Laughlin bill is it I think for the first time, as we've seen through the legislative process, that it ties the industry together. The current operators, social equity, future licensees. There's a provision in the bill that actually suggests that as MSOs open more stores, they need to open a store with a social equity operator as well. Normally, we get into these situations, I think you've seen it in New York, of an us versus them. It's either social equity or it's MSO. And the reality is, to have a successful adult use marketplace, you need both. You need all. It's got to be a win-win. And Street Laughlin's bill recognized that and tied us together so that stores opening become a process where both social equity and current operators are working together. That is a bright future for cannabis. That's what needs to happen, because we've seen in New York, if you don't let the current operators in, the program can be it's been a mess there for years, right? If we're not helping each other and helping each other win, it can lead to disastrous marketplaces. Now, hopefully New York is turning around, but Pennsylvania, hopefully learning from that, is going to get this program off on the right foot, which can be a very productive program and bring in a lot of tax revenue to the Commonwealth.
Here, just maybe stepping back and just to give some context here, Scott, in terms of formal proposals that are on the table. So in the Senate, it's just the Laughlin bill, and in the House, it's just one Democratic bill. I'm just trying to understand how many formal proposals are on the table, and how much have they been fleshed out in terms of details.
Well, so there's not been a House bill filed this session that is comprehensive that we've seen. There was one last session that went all over the place. There's a lot of talk of what the House Democrats would like to put in their bill. They had their first hearing this past week. On the Senate side of the bill, yeah, the one adult use bill is Laughlin Street. They've been out in front of this. They actually introduced a version of this bill last cycle, and John's correct. They adopted a lot of the things that people came to them and created, I think, a very strong framework from which to build a bipartisan consensus down the road. But as far as the actual, what the House is going to want, it's, there are discussions about, and we're going to talk about this a little later. The liquor store model in Pennsylvania. There's some discussions about whether or not there ought to be, the social equity licenses should be the only ones that are awarded. There's a whole lot of, in the air discussion, but the reality is a bill that would be able to pass both the House and the Senate is going to have components of both. And I think the one thing that John talked about, that we talked about last session when we were putting the first time through this, and then now again coming back this session, is that idea of the incubation, of having the MSOs working with these new companies come in, because people seem to think that cannabis is just, hey, it's a plant, I throw it in the ground, I grow it, I harvest it, I sell it. They don't realize the amount of incredibly complicated science that goes into getting consistent results, getting things that are going to test cleanly, that are going to be able to go to market, and they're going to be able to be marketed properly. So having that type of incubation situation, which is something that has not been tried nationally to any great success yet, and something I think we would set a precedent in Pennsylvania that would be copied in a lot of other places, because I think it's the way you'll see the most success.
Trent, do you have a sense in terms of how much support does the Laughlin bill have among Republicans in the Senate? I mean, I know before, I think someone mentioned one or two people only, but do you have more color on that, Trent?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Scott alluded to, there are people that, want to make sure that they continue to follow, leadership direction, and being able to, play the politics correctly. I think you're going to see, that continue to be, a piece that's going to be negotiated. The first piece that's most important, and I think, we continue to push on is getting that bill out of committee, kind of that being the first step, with Senator Regan chairing there. Once that gets out, I think you'll start to see a real whip count develop on what the vote would be with the Republicans and the Democrats actually on the floor. But that first step is getting it up and out of committee, and that takes both Republican and Democrat votes.
But maybe just, I don't know if you, Trent or Scott, but expand on that process, right? What's the timeline in terms of, getting out of committee? I know it's always unpredictable, but, what can we expect there? And then what's the step after it get out of committee? Does it have to go to a House first, or does the Senate have to vote for it at the state level? How does that work? Just more details on the timeline and how that will work out.
Sure. So there would have to be a 24-hour window to sunshine the hearing that would be held for the vote on the bill to bring it out of committee. So it could come out of committee as soon as November 14th, but probably you're looking at sometime in mid to late November on the outside, and then into December if we're not able to get it done before then. The idea of the committee timeline right now is just a question of having the leadership clear it and have the votes be able to be freed up to go forward. Once it would leave the Senate hearing, or once you would get it out of committee, it would go to the full Senate to be voted on. It would have to be on the calendar for 3 days. That's where I think you'd see a lot of the what I would call the knockdown, drag out debate fight take place on this issue in terms of the Senate, and that's where I think you'll see some of the deal cutting be made. That's going to take more time. That's going to be part of the budget process. You're talking in February. I think that's when you're most likely going to see, because that's when the governor's going to be weighing in and looking at it from his budget perspective. It's also going to be when they're starting to put the numbers together for the the coming year, and that's where the real the opportunity to show what cannabis revenue can do both this year and going forward. But as far as the timeline is concerned, it really can move as quickly as the legislature wants to. But street lawful will start in the Senate. The House could start their own bill, send it over to the Senate, and it can be done that way. There could be what's called a gut and replace, where you would go into a vehicle that's in the right area of law, where you could replace it with the complete text of say street lawful on the House side and send it over to the Senate that way. And we are actively working on all those avenues. The cleanest one, and the one I think that makes the most logical sense, obviously, is get street lawful out of committee and get it on the floor of the Senate and get a vote.
John, just staying on that point, I mean, what I'm trying to understand here is whether, a Laughlin bill, is it something that we can assume has a lot of support from the Senate Democrats? So you have those 22 votes, and then it's just a matter of getting 2 or 3 Republicans, and then you're done? Or is there a lot of differences within the Laughlin bill and what's in the House, pushed by the Democrats probably? So then you don't have really the Senate Democrats helping the Laughlin bill. I'm just staying on the Republicans on the Senate side right now, but just trying to understand how much legs and support does the bill really have.
Well, Senator Street is the chairman of the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. So the belief is the assurance, I shouldn't say assurances, but the discussion's always been that the 22 of those votes are there for his bill, provided the Republicans supply their votes. Now, the issue with the Republicans is you need to flip 4 if you don't want to bring in the lieutenant governor as a vote, but the lieutenant governor is a Democrat and would vote with the administration. So really, you need to flip 3. I think you probably see it being more than that when it's all said and done. By the time the bill's going to go, there are enough districts where this polls in the 60s and the 70s that you'll see people that will, as long as it's no longer going to cost them in a primary, it's no longer going to cost them with leadership, that vote becomes a lot easier to put up because it is something that by and large their constituency wants. And the people that are opposed to it don't vote the issue. It's not a voting issue like, say abortion is for a certain segment of the population. If you are in favor of cannabis legalization, it's a voting issue for you. If you're opposed to it, it ranks somewhere around 7 or 8 on things that you care about when you're voting based on polling.
John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but in terms of the 28 Republican seats, are any of them up for election this cycle, or we're talking November 24th? John Sullivan?
Oh, sorry, yeah, November 24th. Yeah, November 24 for the Senate elections. But to Scott's point, I mean, we've done polling in several of the Republican districts in Pennsylvania, and all of them show that both Republicans and Democrats at this point favor, and certainly that independent voting bloc, the numbers are huge in support of adult use cannabis. I mean, I think people realize, and I should say Republicans have realized that is the where the numbers are at. The question is, some people still have emotional responses to it. There are some Republicans that you'll never get, I think. But that said, you don't need a whole lot of numbers. What you need is a bill to get to the floor in the Senate. And I'm confident if we get a bill on the floor, we have the Republican votes and certainly the Democrat votes to pass it.
Right. Trent, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the important piece is, as Scott and John alluded to, this polls very, very favorably. A lot of us within the industry over the last couple months, have really pushed this from a grassroots perspective with our patients and our stores. We've had 2,000 advocates sign up through that program and send over, roughly 6,800 emails and or tweets to their local legislators to get the message across. And so, we're attacking this from, I guess, both angles. But people are quickly realizing that this is something that their constituents want and expect for them to get done in the very near future. It's not something they're going to lose, either the election and or a primary on.
And one more thing I would add to that polling, there was a polling question we did that, in every district, which was a choice between the status quo and a regulated market. Rather than just saying, do you favor legalization, put it really to the binary choice that you have, which is there is a cannabis market in every town in Pennsylvania. It's just unregulated. And the question is, do you want a regulated marketplace or do you want do you want an unregulated marketplace? That pulled in 90%. When you were given that binary choice between an unregulated market or one that has age controls and has testing and has all the other features that a regulated market is able to bring to bear, it polled extremely well. And it's just a question, for the handful of Republicans, there are a couple of Senate seats, and I don't want to name names on this call and get them in trouble because they're going to be out there working very hard to fundraise, but there are a couple of Republicans whose seats are very close. And this is an issue that, personally, I believe would actually push them over the top with that independent block, because it would separate them out from this, what could be a very tough anchor at the top of the ticket for the Republican Party in Pennsylvania come 24.
And again, on that point, Scott, I guess, to the staffers of those Republican senators, this should be obvious. There's not a lot of debate in terms of the polling. It's not like it's something they can look at and say, well, it's not there. It should be obvious to the staffers, right?
The polling is clear. So, where you can poll inside of your district's primary and you can get numbers that maybe don't look as favorable. But if you're polling these districts, it is overwhelming. And it's a 50% plus with Republicans. This isn't something where, the real question, the real delta in terms of response is age. It's less than it's less than party. So the older, you have an older skew that is opposed to it because they grew up on the Reefer Madness, propaganda, and were fed something very different. Whereas you have now, a generation, my generation, our 50s, view it very differently and very pragmatically. And those are the people now that are coming into power, and then have, the Governor Shapiro is, I believe, 50 or 51, 52, somewhere in that range. And, and he views this issue very differently than, say, a Governor Corbett would have. And so what we have now is an opportunity, because of the way the attitude has changed. And I hate to say it, but also it's how some of the opposition has died out, literally.
So, John, I know we spent a lot of time discussing the Senate side of things, but, I guess the way I would move to the House discussion is whether the Laughlin bill, which seems to be the one that's carrying the momentum, right? And based on everything you explained, it could have enough votes to pass. Is that a good framework to be adopted by the House, or are there a lot of things in that bill that are non-starters for some of the Democrats, maybe including the governor, right? Because the House has its own bill. So maybe, I guess, John, the first question would be compare, and again, I know there's no House bill on the table right now, but we have the one from the prior session. Would there be differences between the Laughlin bill and whatever is in the House from the Democrats that may make it difficult to find a compromise between the two?
Yeah, listen, I think there is definitely room for compromise there. I haven't heard any negative comments from the governor's office about the Street Laughlin framework. I don't know that they would accept it whole cloth I know the governor has some priorities around adult use that he would like to see, so he's got to make sure that those satisfy his priorities. On the House side, I think Scott alluded to it earlier. I think the last time the Democrats controlled in the House in Pennsylvania was about 20 years ago. So they are, and they have a 1-vote majority. So they're still kind of trying to find their way, I guess, giving them some credit. They have a lot of voices that they're listening to now. But again, I think as folks get educated, and Scott alluded to the importance of Senator Street and the Democratic Party, as folks get educated on what's in his bill, I think there's more and more enthusiasm around it. And I think, we may see one cannabis-related bill, Senate Bill 773, pass or not pass in the House right now, but there was a gut and replace amendment that is being proposed to that bill that is essentially Street Laughlin. So I think we're seeing that framework gain momentum on both sides of the chamber. There will be a lot of voices in the House that have to be dealt with, but ultimately I think this comes down to the leadership from the House and the Senate and the governor's office sitting in a room talking budget and coming to a compromise.
Just staying with you, John, you mentioned the governor priorities on recreational. What would they be based on what you understand?
Listen, I think the governor definitely wants to see a safe and regulated marketplace. You know, he wants to make sure the standards, et cetera, are in there. He comes from a law enforcement background. So I think Scott alluded to it earlier. He'll want to see some support for law enforcement, especially around traffic regulations, testing, those kinds of things. And then I also think that he needs to be assured that the social equity components are there for him. And again, I think with Senator Street's voice, that concern and what has been written in that bill will certainly go a long way with the governor.
Anything you want to add there, Scott, on that specific point?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the House too. What you're seeing in the House is it's kind of like the same way that you saw in the U.S. House with the Republicans. You have a small faction within a larger, caucus that has a lot of, that's very loud. So you're going to have a portion of the Democratic caucus that's going to be demanding some things that I think are going to be tough to push through. For example, one of the things that keeps coming up is this idea of having the state store system distribute. Well, first off, before there's some type of safe banking done, there's no way the state could put all their bank accounts at risk. So it's a non-starter from that perspective. It's also a non-starter in the Senate because the Republicans that control the Senate are not going to don't like the state system for liquor stores, aren't about to create a whole new system of distribution through a liquor store type system. So there'll have to be some type of discussion on contract labor agreements, perhaps. I'm not sure exactly how that'll play out, but the big priority items, the expungements and those types of things, these are things I believe most people are in line with that support the bill. It's not, I don't think there's a lot of pushback on the idea that we ought to be having expungements for nonviolent minor marijuana crimes from the past 60, 70, 80 years of prohibition. How you go about implementing that's obviously going to be tricky, but that's more of a process rather than a policy concern. And so I think as you see this evolve, what really is going to come down into play is you're going to have a governor now that's going to put his shoulder into the discussion. And once there's the reason why Street Laughlin, that framework makes a lot of sense, is that it is something that can get moving and it is something that the governor can get behind and then use that as an opportunity, as a negotiating point. And frankly, look, he's got a lot more leverage than any governor we've had in a while, probably since Rendell, because both his personal popularity and his willingness to compromise, which we have not seen a lot of. He's a deal maker.
Yeah, and I just to build on that point, Pablo, real quick, Governor Shapiro came, he was state AG, but prior to that, he came up through the House, and so he knows and understands kind of the inner workings of what it takes to get something through that, and be the leader of that party and of that chamber. And so I think that's a super important kind of nuance that a lot of people don't quite appreciate or pick up on as well.
Right. Here, maybe it's for Scholar John, but and again, for those that are not so familiar with the Pennsylvania situation, but I guess what I'm trying to understand on the House, I guess the question would be, what are the non-starters for the Democrats, right? Or what they must really, really have. But then on the other hand, there's this question of how much leverage do they really have, right? You're saying they only have one seat majority. But, for maybe go through some of those hot buttons, right? What are they? How important is it to them? And why this issue about the liquor stores being a distribution point? Why is that so important to them? Or maybe it's not that important, right? Social equity, let's define that. Is it about, the MSOs being able to partner with one social equity licensee and open a store? Or is it about giving social equity a greater number of licenses? If we know, try to expand in terms of what are the hot buttons, the must-have things that the Democrats would want in the House bill. Scott.
Well, first thing I can tell you that from the Democrat perspective that we've heard is they don't want to see a recriminalization. So if we're going to have a legalization paradigm, and we're going to have penalties for having product get diverted or be given to underage, we just don't want to turn it into another war on drugs type of paradigm where you have a lot of low-level criminal activity that doesn't get taken out by this. So there's a concern about putting too much money into law enforcement if it's going to be used in that fashion, as opposed to, as John was alluding to, traffic control and those types of things. The other non-starters for the Democrats, as far as I wouldn't call them non-starters, but I think must-haves. The social equity piece has to be put together properly. And again, what that ultimately looks like is going to be negotiated out, but it's going to have some part of the financing components. There's going to have to be some part of the component where I believe you're going to have the mentoring, the incubating process, or whatever we're going to call that. But I don't think that you're going to see a huge list of negatives on the Democrat side as much as you see in the Republican. I think it's more a question of how do you structure these things and how do they get put into the bill.
Yeah, and just to weigh in on that, I think Democrats have to have the criminal justice side. They have to have the expungement side. That's got to be part of any bill to wipe people's records who were arrested for possession of cannabis over the years. Allowing those same folks to participate in the program. A lot of states prohibit former justice-involved individuals from even working in the cannabis industry. So to make sure that that doesn't happen, to make sure some of the tax dollars are going back to reinvest in those communities that were most harmed by the war on drugs. I think Democrats are going to want some of that. But also, when it comes, they want ownership. I mean, by and large, and this is why I don't think the store-owned liquor store model has a whole lot of traction, even amongst Democrats. I know some are suggesting it, but most want to see minority ownership of dispensary licenses, of cultivation licenses. And if you have the state run them, you don't see that. So, my gut is that if there's a nice balance to make sure that both the MSOs participate and help and assist and make sure that true social equity stores open with their own ownership. I'm not saying the MSOs own those too, but make sure that that ownership happens as well. I think Democrats can get behind that writ large in the House. And I think to Scott's earlier point, I think this talk of state-owned stores probably falls away.
Yeah, but just not to push too much on the store on the state store model, but Scott, I guess why is that such a big deal for the Democrats, right? And could you have a hybrid system in which the state-owned stores sell cannabis, but you also have let's call it the private sector, whether it's social equity or MSOs or combined, also selling cannabis. Scott,
I think you probably you'd come up with some camel that we would call a hybrid system. I think it would probably end up having some of the same problems and flaws that having the state system involved in it. The real reason, the real push for the state system is because it is a unionized workforce, and it is it's 80-some thousand union jobs that are currently in the liquor store system. So if you figure that increases by 50%, you just added 40,000 new dues paying members to the union. So that's obviously, if you are pro-union labor, it's one of the ways to ensure that the marketplace is unionized. But as far as the actual, how will they die on that hill to keep it or not? I tend to think that it'll be something that's used as a negotiating point, because I don't believe they think they can get it passed in the Senate. I mean, it's really, the state system has been such a point of contention between the two parties. You can argue that they both like it because it gives them something to campaign on, but the reality is putting a new system in place and just doesn't make a whole lot of sense when the current system is already despised by 70% of people have to deal with it. Now, the one thing that I think the Republicans will also use in terms of pushing back on the state system model is the state then becomes involved in this in a way that, until there is a federal change, would impact every bank account that the state runs. And so it would be very difficult for the state to be involved at that level prior to there being a massive federal change.
Yeah, just to build on that, not only their bank accounts are at risk, but their their leases, all the stores where those are at, that's put into risk without any federal normalization. I think I'd also point out, and most people know on this call, or maybe they don't, all I have to do is point up north to Moncton, New Brunswick, or other provinces that tried to run cannabis through their existing distribution points, and you can see how much they fell on their face, and have looked to privatize that. So it's not like you just flip the switch and you add cannabis to your store and then voila, you're selling cannabis overnight. There's a lot more nuances to that. And then also, you've seen New Hampshire try to, pass a state model store for, multiple years now. And they keep falling flat on their faces there. They can't even get it out of committee, quite frankly. And so, there's a lot of difficulties or hurdles, if you will, that would incur with running a state modeled store.
Right. Look, I'm going to stay on the subject here, but I want to touch on 2 points that are maybe side points. But one, Scott, I mean, in the past, I think there's been talk about just privatizing the whole state liquor store model, right? And that would take care maybe of some of the gaps in the budget. Is that possible? Do you see that as a possibility? I mean, the last time I remember covering liquor stores back in the day, I calculated it would be a pretty big number, I think 7 or 8 billion. But any thoughts on that, Scott?
Not with the current administration, though. The governor's not going to sign a privatization
Why not?
bill.
Why not?
I think because it's 80,000 union jobs. I mean, it's just not something they're going to mess with at the moment. Even when the Republicans had complete control, they didn't even have the momentum. Excuse me.
Okay.
To push that through.
Okay. And then also on a separate subject, maybe Trent or John, any views on Ohio? I mean, obviously we are hearing about the polls, right? Tomorrow is a vote. Any projections you want to make, and is it binding really in a state where the Republicans control pretty much, obviously the governorship and the chambers? John,
I'll let you make those fun predictions that are never right.
Crystal ball
well, I'll say the over/under is 57% approval. I'll take the over. I'll be enthusiastic. I think there's a lot of momentum around it. There was some late opposition from a few of the statewide politicians, but the polling is the polling on this. I don't see a scenario where it's at least not in the mid 50s coming out tomorrow. To answer your other question, though, Pablo, it is a state-initiated legislation, or I'm sorry, ballot-initiated legislation. So this is actually is a bill that becomes law. The legislature can tinker with it. They could theoretically repeal it. I would say that we've done a lot of work with the Ohio legislature. I think a repeal is extremely unlikely. Anytime for a legislature to mess with something that's going to get close to 60% approval in a state is foolhardy. And I think most of them realize that. Could there be some tinkering around the edges with some amendments to it or some additional legislation that's put forward? Yes, but I'm confident. I am sit here confident of the results that's going to come out tomorrow, and that there will be adult use cannabis in Ohio.
Okay, but go on.
Go ahead, Pablo.
Go on.
I was just going to say, as somebody that born and raised and lived in Ohio until I was 26 or 27 years old, and still have plenty of friends there. I track on social media where everything falls. I think that vote, the special election vote back in August, September, around changing the constitutional amendment, which is up also on the ballot this year around abortion, is going to bring out a lot of folks that will vote yes on adult use cannabis, but also really send a message to the legislators and the governor around trying to overstep their reach against their constituents, and that would send a strong message to be able to vote them out come 24. And so I think as Scott mentioned, we're no longer at a Republican versus a Democrat, should cannabis be legal or not legal. This is the older population versus the younger population, and I think you're starting to see the younger population really take note of the lack of response and or the lack of accountability that a lot of these folks have.
But on that point, John, I mean, what about the school of thought that about the handle, whether it's a 5 or a 6? If it's in the 50s, maybe the Republicans are more emboldened to block the whole thing. Where if it's in the 60s, it's a different story, or that shouldn't make such a big difference. John?
Yeah, I mean, I think Scott alluded to it earlier today. Josh Shapiro's approval ratings.
We're talking in Ohio. I'm sorry, I'm talking Ohio.
Yeah. No, I'm just making the point. His approval ratings in the low 60s, which might as well be 90. Anytime anything gets above 55%, anywhere, it's kind of an overwhelming statement. So, I think if we get up to the mid to high 50s, the politicians there are going to be very, very cautious about any changes they make to it.
Yeah. And last question in Ohio. Go on, Scott. Sorry.
So plus they also have cover. So the nice thing is if this gets done by the voting population,
Mhm.
You're not voting for it. You're not taking that position. You are merely implementing the will of the people, which is, ultimately what you're supposed to be doing. And I'm going to go a little bolder than John. I'm going to say the first number is going to be a 6.
Oh,
All right.
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
willing. I think it's going to hit 60.
Okay.
I hope
Yeah,
so.
John, on that point, I mean, so what's the timetable? Let's say, okay, we get something in the 60s. The governor and the chambers decide to go ahead. What's the timetable? I mean, when are you actually selling adult cannabis in Ohio? What
Yeah,
would
I
be
believe
the
the
timetable?
legislation says 9 months after the initiative is passed. So call it Q4 next year.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
So,
Pablo, sorry, just one more super important point. If you ask John or ask Scott, those guys are much more seasoned when it comes to legislators and implementing legislation. If you ask them what would they rather do, pass a bill or kill a bill, I know which one they're picking 10 out of 10 times. And so plucking a couple votes away from a full repeal or a partial repeal is very different than trying to have to pass the legislation itself. I think that's a super important point.
okay, now coming back to Pennsylvania. So Scott, in terms of could we have a ballot initiative in Pennsylvania, or it has to go through a legislative process?
Yeah, we don't have a ballot initiative process. The closest we come to is a constitutional amendment, which would take 2 sessions, and that means a minimum of 2 years. And it's a very complicated process that only recently has started to be used, kind of like a ballot initiative, and it has only been done for very narrow topics that were politically charged at the exact moment they were happening. And no, it would have to be done legislatively, and the cleanest path forward for Pennsylvania is a legislative fix, because everything else is you'd be making it up as you go.
Understood. So look, I'm going to try to bring everything together now, and then maybe force you to make some predictions here. John, I'll start with you. But in terms of based on everything we've talked about, the Senate, the House in Pennsylvania, tell me how things play out in your, crystal ball question sort of thing here. But timetable, who goes first, compromise.
Yeah, listen, I'm hopeful, as Scott laid out earlier, that we can see some movement in the Senate with Street Laughlin, and that the Democrats will continue to hold hearings and move forward. But ultimately, I think this gets done in Q1 during the budget process. It gets finalized there, and then we see adult use shortly thereafter.
Scott?
Yeah, and
Trent, go ahead. Sorry, Trent. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, piggybacking off of John, currently the text reads 180 days post signing. I think we've all made a strong point, and the industry will continue to make a strong point that we have the infrastructure built, that we have the 178 stores in operation, and we're ready to go. And so I think that 180 could quickly flip to 90 days. And so I'll take that Q1 and put 90 days on it. So you're looking at, a summer sales starting.
Yeah, but just staying on that point, Trent, in terms of, okay, so you have the stores, 178. What about the cultivation side of things? I mean, do you have enough to serve the recreational market while still being able to take care of the medical patients? To your knowledge.
Yes. I think we've seen news stories from multiple different businesses of having to lay off folks, shutting down certain cultivation. I know we've not made major investments into our facilities, but we have expanded. So yes, I do think there's supply out there to both service medical patients, but also then see a 2 to 2.5x growth from a revenue perspective with adult use.
Yeah, and Trent, I want to stay with you, Scott, and then I want you to bring everything together again, and your projection of timetable. But Trent, staying with you in terms of as we get recreational cannabis in Pennsylvania, what type of changes could we see on the medical side? Maybe none, right? But in some states, if you put taxes on the adult side and there's no taxes on the medical, that's one way to help medical patients, right? In Georgia, we're seeing pharmacies are being allowed to retail and dispense medical cannabis, right? To your knowledge, is there anything in the works to help the medical patients in Pennsylvania, or not necessarily right now?
We've seen a continued medical cleanup bill that's out there that's filed from Senator Regan. But I like I said at the onset, we have a really strong and good medical program in Pennsylvania. I don't think there's many flips that are necessary. There's obviously a few product types that are not currently available in medical PA medical that would more than likely be available in adult use. And so, maybe that gets added, but we're kind of at the peak when it comes to what a medical program can do or can be for Pennsylvania. And so I think, any additional growth in the state is just from an adult use perspective and people not having to go through that process.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. So again, bring it all together, but I'm not pushing back here, but I guess the concern I have is that it seems that the path on the Senate side looks quite straightforward based on everything that's been discussed. The House still hasn't necessarily tabled a bill. Could they come out with something that's too aggressive and makes it difficult to find compromise? Or maybe I should focus on the fact that they don't have a lot of clout because they only have a 1-seat majority, and they have to be more realistic. But I'm just trying. It's like we are comparing apples and oranges, and that there is something in the Senate, there isn't something specifically in the House, and could they come out with something that's so different that derails the whole process? But again, in terms of bringing everything together, Scott, yeah.
Excuse me. So I think first off, I would add that the one thing that Trent alluded to was with an adult use program, you would see edibles be introduced in Pennsylvania for the first time, which would make sense both from a medical side. I think that would help the medical program by having edibles available. Now, getting back to your question, the way the House is going to have to come together and the way the House bill would come together could create what you described would be a too aggressive bill. But industry has been working with the people that are drafting that. We're going to be in every hearing going forward. There will be multiple new hearings. And our job in that is to keep the House from getting too far off the rails. And I believe we'll be successful doing that because they realize they're going to have to get something that passes the Senate, just as the Senate realizes they have to have something that will pass the House. The House is going to be, I don't want to say easier to get something through, but the Democrats have been telling their constituencies for the better part of a decade plus that they were going to get this done. It would be very difficult for them to take a bill that had Republican support in the Senate that could get through and get to the governor's desk and kill that because it doesn't have everything they want. I think they want some of what they want, and you'll see that compromise take place. Excuse me. As far as the timetable goes, I think John hit it. You're going to see this become part of the budget hearing process, which takes place in Q1. I do believe you'll see that time period cut down from 180 to 90 days. We've shown some of the dangers of having that extended gray period that's happened in Virginia, that's happened in DC, that's happened in any number of jurisdictions. And the reality is Pennsylvania's medical program was so well put together and is supplied so well that it's one of the few that you could probably flip the switch. And I would say that the two guys on this call that work in the industry would say they could do it in 30 days. They can be servicing the adult population in 30 days, but 90 days is certainly very doable. And it's doable not just for the big guys, but also for the independents who are supplying our store, supplying the MSO stores right now, because they won't have their dispensaries up and running in time, if it's, if we're talking about doing it in the time frame. And so they'll need an outlet for that. So there'll be an additional source of product. I don't think you'll see the types of shortages you saw and product problems that you saw in New Jersey, New York, and places that were just not prepared for the amount of volume that adult use is going to bring. PA is a big, ripe market ready to fall.
Right.
Yeah, and Pablo, just to be clear, if the Senate bill gets up and out of the Senate, that bill then goes over to the House. So theoretically, the House could just work off of that bill as well. So I want to make that clear to folks that maybe don't quite understand the flow.
And John alluded to this earlier too. There's also a way for the language from the Senate bill to be dumped into a House bill that is sitting on the calendar. There is a bill in the right topic area on the House calendar that could have a dump and replace that would become that vehicle. So as this goes forward, one of the challenges of being a cannabis lobbyist or being a cannabis executive and working in Pennsylvania is you do have to be willing to be fluid because things change very rapidly. We had a good setup the last cycle, and then we had a crazy primary and a bunch of different things happened. and some of the support fell away that we had, some of the momentum fell away. This cycle feels more like we're building momentum because of the fact that there are some seats that are going to be in play over the course of the next 18 or 15 months for the Republicans. And there's also going to be, the House is so narrowly divided that it becomes a much more interesting place to try to negotiate.
Thank you. Look, I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to just ask some questions that came through email here, but just brief answers, maybe John or Trent. Someone asking, what about Virginia? Saying, you have all this pressure, Pennsylvania flips, Ohio flips, right? Maryland, New Jersey already. Does that mean that Virginia is next? I mean, any quick thoughts there, Trent or John? I mean, just short answers, please.
Yeah, I think I can give a much more clear answer tomorrow after we know where the House and the Senate at the state level. All the seats are up for the House and the Senate, and so in Virginia. So they do the opposite of PA. They do off-year elections, and so I can give a much more definitive answer on where that's at in 48 hours.
Right.
Agree with Trent on that one. Yep. Total agreement.
All right. And then there's two more questions that are almost very similar. I'll let each one take a quick answer. Probability that Pennsylvania is selling adult cannabis by July 1st, and probability that Pennsylvania starts recreational cannabis before Ohio. I mean, I'll start with you, John, but just a number, just a probability, your best estimate.
Man, I wish my crystal ball is a little foggy today, but I'm going to say Ohio and Ohio goes first, but not by much. I'd say it's. I think there is a possibility that towards, like I said, Q4 of next year, we see adult use in Pennsylvania, and and we're selling in Ohio. So hopefully they're both turned on about the same time.
I'll take July. I'll take July 1st in PA. And then 9 months would be, I guess, September for Ohio. So I'll take PA over Ohio.
All right,
and
great.
that pains me to say as an Ohio boy.
All right, Scott, I don't know if you want to participate on the numbers I
work for Trent, so I'm going to go with PA over Ohio.
Okay.
I think the probability is, as part of this budget cycle, I think the probability is high that you'll get it. The exact date you start sales in PA will depend on when that part of the budget gets done.
Right. Okay. Look, I know we're almost out. I mean, obviously over the time here, we've covered a lot. I don't know if anyone wants to make any closing remarks, but again, thank you very much to all three speakers, Scott Paterno, Trent Woloveck, and John Sullivan. Again, thanks, and thanks to everyone for joining. But if any one of you want to make any closing remarks here. Trent, I'll start with you. But
yeah, I think quick closing remarks is we have a lot of momentum, as Scott alluded to. Things are going to happen and happen quick. It's a legislative process, so it's not always public, and not always the truth gets disseminated out through the media. And so continue to be bullish and excited about the prospects in the Commonwealth to start selling adult use.
John?
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. Really appreciate the time today. It's always good to see Scott and Trent as well. Listen, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm in Pennsylvania. Like I said, there is some momentum there. These things are always fraught with peril, but things look good in Pennsylvania right now. They look good in Ohio. I just say to everybody that's on here, if you know politicians federally, locally, statewide, give them a call, push them. And if you're in any of these states, be sure you get out and vote, because that's ultimately, those votes are what turn these politicians around.
Scott?
Yeah, I'm going to stay, right along the party line here and say that I'm bullish about this year, mainly because it's part of the budget. As long as it's a budget issue, then it becomes something that's a lot easier to push through. Especially when you've got the governor budgeting for it and putting his shoulder into it. Right. Pennsylvania is a complicated place. We used to joke around, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, a whole lot of Alabama in between, however you want to look at it. But the way that this shapes up right now, polling that is statewide, I believe that this is the year it gets done.
Right. And the governor is in the first year of a 6-year term, right?
4-year term.
4-year term, right. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
So president halfway through his second term.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all three speakers. Things look good in this area, Pennsylvania and Ohio. Everyone have a good day. Thank you for joining. Have a good day. Thanks
Pablo.
Thank you.